Good afternoon, everyone. This is Clayton Chase with Torrey Hills Capital. I want to welcome you to the Eupraxia Pharmaceuticals Zoom presentation for March 11th, 2025. I trust and hope you're all doing well out there, having a great start for 2025. All things considered, of course, it looks like things are coming back a little bit today, so it's always good to see. Now, as all of you know, and you've seen a number of these presentations, we are constantly on the lookout for companies that either are underfollowed, underappreciated by the market, basically something that we can find before everyone else finds them. And therefore, I'm very excited to be sharing with you a new client of ours that we feel has that really special market disconnect and could be well positioned for some above average enterprise growth, share price appreciation, et cetera, over the next couple of quarters. That is, if they're successful in executing their current development plan, which we're going to learn more about right now. And as always, if you have questions during the presentation, feel free to ask. You can either click on the Q&A icon on the Zoom taskbar. You can type in your question, and we'll be sure it gets addressed at that time. Our featured company today is Eupraxia Pharmaceuticals. Eupraxia Pharmaceuticals is a clinical stage biotechnology company. It's bringing to the clinic a novel and proprietary time-released drug delivery technology called DiffuSphere. Now, the DiffuSphere platform addresses a significant unmet medical need for safe and long-lasting symptom relief in a number of medical indications, and the company is currently evaluating the efficacy of DiffuSphere for the treatment of EOE, or eosinophilic esophagitis. Now, if you don't know what that is, that's okay. I didn't know what it was either, but we're going to learn more about it today. We also are treating or looking to see the efficacy on OA, or knee osteoarthritis. I'm sure many of you, I do know about that one. Now, in addition to these two high-value markets, Eupraxia believes that DiffuSphere technology could also be highly effective in the time-release drug delivery for post-operative pain and inflammation, as well as an effective drug delivery platform for a myriad of different cancer therapies, chemotherapies, et cetera, that would improve both the safety profile and patient outcomes over the current standard of care. Eupraxia trades on the Nasdaq under the ticker symbol EPRX, also on the TSX on the same symbol. It's currently trading about $4.15 a share, gives the company a market cap of just around $150 million. With us today to discuss Eupraxia Pharmaceuticals is the company's Chief Executive Officer, Dr. James Helliwell. Hi, James. How are you today?
Hi, Clayton. I'm doing really well. Thank you very much for having me and for everybody to being here.
Great. Well, we're really excited to have you here today. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that you can bring yours up.
Perfect.
And then we can get right into the presentation. Let's see. Stop share right there. Okay. That should do it. And you're already up. Great. Looks good.
Perfect.
The floor is yours. Take it away, sir.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Clayton. And as Clayton says, if you have questions throughout, please do post them in there. Clayton will let me know. I can't see the little question bar here in presentation mode. So
I'll prompt you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So let me give you a little bit of background on me and the company itself. So as Clayton said, I'm a physician. And I was a specialist physician, so cardiothoracic anesthesiologist. So I spent my days doing mostly heart transplants, complex heart surgery, and critical care. And so why does that matter? That matters because the thing that I really was able to see in treating transplant patients and complex heart patients is that precision matters. It is all about you have to give the right drug at the right dose to where you need it and not where you don't. So in other words, when you have a diseased tissue, you want to target that tissue and not everything else in the body. And you want to ensure that that way you get maximum efficacy with minimum side effects. And at the same time, we're trying to get maximum duration. So the way that we tackle this is really by looking at how the body actually does this. And if you think about your body today, everything that it's doing, so the breathing that you're doing, your heart is pumping, your kidneys are working, your liver is working, all of that is maintaining equilibrium through diffusion In other words, we are moving things across membranes in our body very smoothly and basically adjusting concentrations and balancing them. So what we wanted to do was to replicate that biologic stability, but for drug delivery. Now I can do that in an operating room in an intensive care unit with a catheter and a pump, but you can't do that as an outpatient. So as a patient today, whether you're taking an oral drug for a blood pressure medicine, a pain medicine, an antibiotic, or whether it's an injectable medication that you might be taking once a week, the reality is that all of those, they deliver with a peak that looks like a big mountaintop with a very steep decline. That's a logarithmic decline on the other side. All the side effects are from the peak, and then you lose the efficacy on that decline. So how did we solve this problem? So my co-founder, chief scientific officer, and chief operating officer, Amanda Malone, she did her PhD at Stanford in bioengineering and tackled this as an engineering problem. So what you're looking at on the screen in front of you is the diffusphere. So if you look at these, they're like little balloons. On the inside is only drug. So we build a special crystal of this drug. And in the assets we're going to be talking about today, we're using a steroid called fluticasone propionate. So you may know it as Flovent, Flonase, Advair. It's quite literally taken by tens of millions of people every day. Very safe, but has a real difficulty being targeted to somewhere other than the lungs. And so what we've done here is packaged it. And then once we have that crystal, we then wrap it in this very thin membrane that we treat so that what it does is it acts like a balloon with little holes in it. So it is leaking out the drug at a steady state into the tissues that have the disease and not the rest of the body. And it stays this size for the whole time so that it can't migrate in the body. So essentially, it gets injected into wherever it is. So if you have osteoarthritis of the knee, it is injected into the knee. If you have disease in the shoulder, it's injected in the shoulder, or in the case of esophageal disease, into the esophagus itself. So what does this actually look like in terms of delivery? Well, what you're looking at here is from our first pivotal trial, so our phase 2b trial, which was in more than 300 patients in osteoarthritis, where we saw fantastic efficacy of almost 6 months of duration with phenomenal safety. Why did we see that? It's because of the way the drug delivered. And here is you can see the delivery from that human study, that very large study, and it's just flat. That green line is if you took Flovent or Flonase every day, that would be how much you would have in your body. And as you can see, we're a log unit below that. So in other words, what we're doing is exactly what we set out to do. We are delivering by diffusion in a very stable and steady state. And we're doing that essentially for a long period of time from a single injection. So depending on the disease, we're talking about a twice a year injection or perhaps even a once a year injection. Now, if you're a patient and you're taking lots of pills or you're dealing with injections every week, you know that to be able to do something just once or twice a year is absolutely transformative. If you combine that convenience with better efficacy and better safety, then you create a real win for patients, for physicians, for insurance companies, and of course, for us as investors, that's a real win because we get to capture a very large market. So speaking of very large and important markets, let's talk about this eosinophilic esophagitis. I'll call it EOE because it's a little bit easier. Most people find eosinophilic esophagitis a bit of a mouthful. So what is this disease? So first, it's a pretty new disease. So if you haven't heard about it, don't be surprised. When I went through medical school, this disease did not exist, was not taught in our curriculum. What there is out there is a lot of patients who feel something that often feels a little bit like heartburn at the beginning, and it's discomfort when they swallow and pain when they swallow. And it usually starts fairly mild. Those are the symptoms of this disease. Why is this disease happening? So eosinophils are little sort of allergic white blood cells, and they basically get into this tissue and they create an inflammatory response. So think of it like asthma, but of the esophagus. So it creates this inflammation, it swells, it makes the esophagus smaller, as time goes on, it also makes it stiffer. So what you end up with is food gets stuck, and that's why it hurts, and it's why it's difficult to swallow. When this progresses, you can get to a place where you really can't eat solid foods properly. You're having to go and sort of get scopes. So having a gastroenterologist go in with an endoscope, so taking pictures, but actually dilating. And they often end up in an emergency room having to have food taken out. Now, the diagnosis of this is often missed because it starts fairly mild and it also can look like other things. And frankly, a lot of people just don't know the disease yet. So what that's resulting in is an absolutely meteoric rise in the incidence and prevalence of this disease. It's not that the disease is becoming more common. It is that we are actually finally diagnosing the people who have the disease and have been misdiagnosed to present. So in 2020, there was only 150,000 people with this disease that were known. By 2024, that was kind of north of 500,000. And they're estimating by 2026, this is going to be north of 1 million people. So this is very quickly becoming, and they believe this is going to be the next Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. So when everybody's heard of those diseases, well, 20 years ago, they were considered rare and very uncommon, and they're not. And so what we believe is that as this disease is really growing, there's going to be a very big need for treatment. So what do people
Hey,
do?
James.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to break in on you like that. But
No, not at
I have a
all.
question. And I had one kind of comment here because one of
Yeah.
my main takeaways from the initial presentation we saw on the BioPub platform was the fact that it's growing so fast, but it's just really growing because more people are now realizing what it is.
Yeah.
They've probably been going to their doctor and say, I've got this condition, but the doctor doesn't really have an effective way to treat it.
Yeah.
So they give them one of these other over-the-counter drugs that don't seem very effective. But I thought that was really an important aspect of what you're doing now, bringing to a solution that people don't really even know what it is. And a lot more people are now getting diagnosed if there's a great therapy for it. And one of the questions is kind of right along that line, and that is, how much does the slow release of the drug enhance the effectiveness of it, in your opinion? I think
Yeah.
that's probably what you're going to go into right about now, I guess, right?
Yeah. So it's a beautiful question, and it's a great setup for the data that we're going to see. So if you think about, we talked about the drugs and how there's a peak and a trough. So the slow release is about two things. It's about the duration of the release, but it's also about the fact that it's not like a rough ocean, it's a calm ocean. So there's no big peaks of waves and troughs. It's just flat and stable. When we think about pain relief, for example, what we want is steady pain relief. When you take an Advil, you get this great pain relief at 2 hours, and at 6 hours, it's gone. You take your next pill at 8 hours, you get good pain relief. That's peaks and troughs. We don't want that. So you maximize efficacy by delivering in a stable way over a long period of time. And really interestingly, you end up actually giving far less drug to the body when you do that. And so we're going to see the evidence of that as we look through the data here and talk about it. But it's a great question and it's bang on. So when we look at what's out there in terms of treatment today, the first thing that most people get is something called a proton pump inhibitor. So you've heard of things like omeprazole, Prevacid. Those drugs are usually used to treat reflux disease, so heartburn. And part of the reason they're the first thing is because that's usually the first misdiagnosis. People say, well, you've probably got heartburn. Let me give you this medication. People stay on it for a year or two and then go, you know what? It's not making any difference. It's not making my life any better. And in fact, my symptoms are getting worse. Then they start to get to the place, oh, we better look at this and find out what it is. And the diagnosis of EOE is often made. Now, there's a beautiful article in the New York Times, which actually talked about this. It was the journey of this poor man who went through 10 years of these symptoms before he finally found someone to diagnose EOE. Hopefully, as this becomes much more common, people are looking for it more and people don't have to wait that long. So what they've done is they've used off-label steroids. So fluticasone, the drug we use, so Flovent, they often have made people essentially take what's supposed to go in the lungs, put it in their mouth, swish it around, and then swallow it. Now, the thing is that when you do that, that gets it to the esophagus. But if you think about it, when you drink a cold glass of water on a hot day, you can feel it going down. It's only there for a couple of seconds. Well, that's what happens with the medications. You need them in the esophagus, but they're not staying there. So what they say is to take these steroids, don't eat or drink for several hours, and do it a couple of times a day. Well, if you do that and you're religious about it, you will get a pretty good response. However, you will also get a fungal infection in your mouth. And so we see discontinuation rates of about 70% because of side effects. So, in other words, the drug is good, the delivery is bad. It's just not precise enough. And so then when we look at the only approved drug for long-term use is a drug called Dupixent. Now, you probably have seen TV ads for its use in asthma, atopic dermatitis, other things that it's used for. When we look at this, it's not perfectly suited for EOE. So normally it's every 2 weeks. They have to use it every week to get the efficacy here. And that efficacy, we see only 39% of patients actually feel better, so get to clinical remission. Only 13% also have histology, so the biopsies also getting into remission. So that's a 13% rate of full remission. The cost for that's about $100,000 a year. And it's a once a week injection with a fair number of side effects. So really not ideal for patients, very expensive, but that's the gold standard today. So we sat and we met with the top people in the world in this disease, of which Dr. Evan Dellin out of Chapel Hill, North Carolina, is the number one. He has now come on after seeing a bunch of data and joined our clinical advisory board and is chair of that board. They helped us design this trial. So what you're looking at here is the first part of a two-part trial. So what we're doing is we're escalating the dose, because what you want to make sure is that you're giving the right amount of drug that's perfectly efficacious and safe, but not more than what you need. And so what we're aiming for here is to get the right coverage of the esophagus and the right sort of dose that we're giving while we're doing it. Now, this is given as an injection by the gastroenterologist through the endoscope during a routine exam. So people go in routinely at a minimum of every year in order to get pictures and biopsies taken, but no treatment is delivered. So we said, look, you're already there and doing this procedure. Patients do not feel injections into their esophagus, just like they don't feel the biopsies. So would you like to do this? And the unanimous answer from doctors was absolutely, this would be an absolute change in the way we treat this disease. So that's what we're doing here. All the blue that you've seen there, we're going to be able to really talk about that data today. The green that you see, the 20 injections of 4 milligrams, which is the 20 over 80, those patients have all been dosed, and we're going to see their data pretty soon. One of the things that's important with this, there is so much data coming over the next 3 quarters from this trial that is going to be growing and solidifying what you're about to see already in data. So let's jump into kind of what matters here and what's important. And maybe I'll pause there and Clayton, just see if there were questions there.
Yeah, that'd be great. There's no questions yet. I had a real quick one.
Yeah.
And it was a question I had on the last presentation. Now, when they administer the treatment, the same physician that's already doing the endoscopy, is it very difficult to do these injections? And is the equipment the same that they're already using, or do they have to get some kind of new equipment?
Yeah, so great question. No, so this is very much what they already do. So the gastroenterologists are expert at these kind of injections. And frankly, when I was thinking of this idea, I recalled, from my training days where I learned how to do this with gastroenterologists. It's very straightforward. It's using all the same equipment that you have already. It's very quick. And they actually, I learned how to do this to deliver Botox for esophageal spasm. And so when I called them, I said, look, you guys do this with Botox. It takes about 4 minutes. Would you like to do it with fluticasone? And the answer was a unanimous yes. And so it's It's very simple. It's very fast. The other thing that's a really interesting dynamic, just given you asked the question, is so if you think about, as you know, all of us at some point are patients, hopefully less often than is often the case that we're patients, but we make connections with our doctors. When you look at the connection that you make with a proceduralist, so what do I mean by that? I mean a surgeon, an interventional cardiologist. We bond with them because we went in with a problem and they fixed it for us. You had a
Sure.
broken hip, you had a knee that needed replacing, you needed a stent, you needed a surgery. They fixed it. You have this bond, very different than the bond you make with a doctor who writes you a prescription, you go fill at a pharmacy. So these gastroenterologists, not only do they believe that this is going to be, a potential first line treatment, better treatment for patients, what they also love is the fact that they will deliver this during a routine annual exam, give it, and the patient will feel better and not have to come back for another year. But their loyalty is absolutely solid to that doctor because they made them feel better with the procedure. And that really matters. So that's a way to really reinforce their practice and their business model. And so we think about these things. You can have the best drug in the world, but if you need physicians to blow up their business model, it's never going to work.
No,
And
I agree.
so this works.
Yeah, that's a really important aspect of the therapy because, like you said, if it's going to really change this, if it's not easier to do or about the same amount of work to do, but I like the win-win-win part of the presentation earlier, where it says it works for the patients, it works
Yep.
for the physicians, which you just said, and it really looks like it's going to work for the payer, the insurance company, because we're going to talk about that in a little bit about the $100,000 for Dupixent. That must be pretty difficult pill to swallow, if you will, right?
Particularly with the efficacy that they're seeing, and
Right.
and side effects.
Sure.
So that's a good springboard into what are we seeing?
Great.
So number one is symptom relief. We want patients to feel better. And this is critically important. So there have been some very fancy monoclonal antibodies. So these are hyper targeted to just one or two sort of receptors and cells in the body for EOE. And those products have reduced eosinophils, those white blood cell counts, but they have not made patients feel better. And so the FDA has said no. And based on a couple of those no's, a couple of big companies like BMS Celgene just announced about 4 weeks ago that they're no longer going to continue with their EOE program, even though it's a massive market, because they knew that they just weren't seeing what they needed to see. Well, what we're seeing here is a massive reduction in symptoms, in addition to the fact that it is getting better over time. So these patients get their injection at day 0, and at 3 months, you can see they're generally about 50% better. Now, remember, we're only still halfway through our dose escalation. So at halfway through our dose escalation, we're having an impact at 12 weeks that is equal to the best anybody else can do or beyond it. Then you look at 24 weeks. So with another 3 months, the esophagus is actually continuing to get better and symptoms are getting way better. So when you look at cohort 5, which is a bigger dose than cohort 4, you can see the linearity of the dose response at 24 weeks. So it's lasting longer. It's an 82% reduction in symptoms, but 100% of the patients are in clinical remission. So if you recall, Dupixent had 39% of patients in clinical remission, and here it's 100%. Cohort 6, it's also 100%. Why? Because as we increase in dose and coverage, we are getting a better response. The other piece here is that response is getting better over time. Now, one of the things that's really important here is duration. You can see this is only 6 months of data. I've been talking about 1 year. So we believe that the ideal sort of commercial opportunity here is to be a 1-year product. That cohort 5, which is only half the dose that we're going to be at the end, we're going to have its 9-month data in the first week of May. Now, if that 9-month data at half the dose shows any efficacy remaining at 9 months, you've basically got a 1 year product. So that data is, we know that pharmaceutical companies who've been reaching out to us are watching for that time point. We know institutional investors are watching for that time point, and we're watching for it. And we know that whatever we see there is very likely to get better and better as we increase in dose. Okay, so then the question is, okay, so why are you seeing this data? And then the second piece is, well, this is subjective data, right? This is how patients are feeling. And yes, that's right. So this is how painful it is to swallow, how often food gets stuck. So it doesn't have a huge placebo response, but it can have one. Well, let's look at the hard data now. So this is objective data. This is biopsies. So what you're seeing here is biopsies taken throughout the esophagus using a scoring system that is looking at the inflammation, fibrosis, and scar tissue of the esophagus brought on by the disease EOE. We're looking at two things here, the grade and the stage. And just like cancer, that's telling you about the severity and sort of the extent of it. How far does it go? When you look at this, again, relating back to Dupixent, that cohort 4 that you see, that is basically what the response is from Dupixent, which is the best therapy on the market today. As we increase in dose, you can see we get a way better response. So what's actually happening is we are healing the diseased tissue and returning it back close to a normal state. And that's why those patients are feeling so much better. So this is that sort of raw objective data that supports why we're seeing the subjective data. Obviously, we're still here at cohort 6, only covering 75% of the esophagus and still at 50% of the final dose. So we hope that this will continue to improve with patients as well as last longer. We have another piece of objective data, which is the number of eosinophils. So here what you're seeing is that we are seeing a big reduction in eosinophils. So it's by cohort 6 as we increase in dose. And again, it's very linear, which is just what you want to see in dose response, a 94% reduction in eosinophils. And then we're also looking at the area of the esophagus that is going into remission. And again, you can see it's going up over time. And Clayton, was there a question there?
Yeah, I had a quick question. As you increase the dosage cohorts, are you seeing any kind of adverse side effects or irritation or anything that would make you feel like maybe the dose escalation is getting to where you can't get any higher?
Yeah, so it's a really great question. So at the beginning, I showed we were, the peak dose we were looking at giving is 120 milligrams. When we went to adjust this protocol to be 1 year, as we saw the data was lasting a long time, the regulators said to us, you can go as high as 200 milligrams because your safety is so good. And so
Right.
we have not yet. Now, look, at some point, there's going to be a dose you see something. I'm not sure we're going to see it in our dose escalation because we're just not going super high because we don't need to. But essentially, I talked about steroids and the fungal infections. That's the biggest thing. I mean, that can be 35, 40, 50% of patients. We've had 0 patients have any fungal infections throughout this entire trial. We have had no drug-related adverse events things that are related to the drug that are problems. In addition to that, you always worry when you're giving a steroid about effects on blood sugar. As you can see here on the left-hand side of the screen, we've had no impact. We have no impact on the body's natural steroid cortisol. And again, following for a very long period of time. And by the way, this safety matches what we saw in our osteoarthritis trial of hundreds of patients, which was incredible and good safety because of the way it's delivered. On the right-hand side of this screen, you're seeing the actual drug levels from these patients. And so you can see as we go up in dose, we're generally going up in what you see in drug levels. But again, they're flat. So there aren't these big peaks and they're lasting for a good long period of time. So this is why we expect this to last a year. And to your question, we're looking for that place where we essentially have no side effects, we have great efficacy and great duration, and where we're really making that tissue better. We think
Sure.
just about at that dose. It's likely going to be our cohort 7 or maybe our cohort 8 based on what we're seeing so far. Cohort 7 data, we're going to be having that data, before the summertime. So it's coming pretty soon. We're also going to have much more data and more extensive data on cohort 6 and 5 and seeing this whole data package. Because that data package is coming in the summertime, it's going to allow us to be able to move to part B of this trial, which is a randomized control phase 2B trial. So this trial is designed to be supportive of registration so that, in other words, we can take this trial, we will run it through the latter part of 2025, the first part of 26, and then in the first part of 26, we're going to unblind that data. So there's going to be another big data release then, but it'll be quite
Hmm.
predictable because you will have seen already that dose in action for a year from the escalating part of the trial. So that means that there's not a lot of risk here. I mean, if you think about it, we know this drug works in this disease. We've seen extensive data of that. This is really about the delivery so that we can maximize the efficacy, minimize the safety issues, and maximize the duration, which hopefully from the data you've seen is what we're doing. Then we'll have an end of phase 2 meeting, which will occur in the middle part of 2026, and then roll into our phase 3, which we anticipate to be a single phase 3 for approval.
Great.
So maybe I'll pause there, see if there's questions on eosinophilic esophagitis just before I dive into the next piece, and then talk a little bit also about sort of where we're going.
That's a great plan. So if you have a question about EOE, I'm not going to try and say it again. You can ring in on the chat icon. You can do a Q&A. You could type it in. You could raise your hand, and I'll open up your microphone. You can ask James the question right online here. Great presentation. I'm so excited about what you're doing. For me, a lot of times these presentations are way over my head. I can't understand why it's working or how it works. But this one seemed quite straightforward. It really hits the 4 Qs. We've hit on 3 of them. My 4 Qs are, is it safe? Does it work? Can you get it FDA approved? And if you do, is there a big market for it? And we'll talk about the market here in a minute, but the first 3 look like they've really hit on the mark here for sure.
Yeah.
I have some questions about the OA side of the presentation here. We do have a question. Let me see here. It is, oh yeah, great question. Is there any institutional coverage? And let us know more about that.
Yeah. So absolutely. So Gary Nachman at Raymond James, who's a top biotech analyst, covers us. So I'd encourage you to look up his coverage. Has a target price of $12, sort of for the progression through this year. Craig Hallam, Albert Lowe covers us as well. Has the same target price, and Rodman and Renshaw, Brendan Folks also covers us, and so that is our U.S. coverage right now, and then Research Capital in Canada also covers us, and so and they really go through this story of EOE, and I think one of the things that you'll see if you look through those reports is just the size of the market. And Clayton, really this gets to your question, which is, what does this market look like? So let's just sort of use some, like, I'm not going to predict revenues here, but let's have some hypothetical math. If we assume that this market is 1 million people, and then let's be conservative and just cut it to 500,000. So if you've got 500,000 people, and there is only one treatment for them today, which is Dupixent, and it's $100,000 a year. If this data never gets better than what we see at cohort 5 and 6, we already know that we're providing better safety, better efficacy, and better duration. And let's say that we don't even go for we don't even try and match Dupixent on price. we say it's going to be $50,000. If you're selling it at $50,000 and you sell it to just 100,000 of those people, you are doing very, very well. And you can very quickly see how this becomes a several billion-dollar a year product in EOE, particularly with the dearth of competition, the pricing that you can get. And if you start to actually become potentially first-line therapy, you're going to be capturing almost all of the patients. And so it's something as we look at this, and it's why Big Pharma is chasing this market. And clearly they've struggled. And we believe, and again, Clayton, to your comment about you understand this, when I was teaching fellows and residents how to do heart transplants, my commentary was always, look, what we're doing is really complicated. Your job is to make it look really simple. Um, Everybody should watch you do your job and not think, wow, this must be really hard. Look at them panicking and look at them doing all this. They should look at you and go, that's the easiest job in the world. I could do that. And that's what I believe here. Our job is not to create complexity. Our job is to create a great product for patients that works well, that's safe, and that meets the needs of the system. Because then you get good uptake by payers, good uptake by physicians. And so we believe this has a very large market in EOE. And we haven't even really talked about this, but I'll glance off it. There is another esophageal disorder called benign strictures. There are several million people a year who have that in the United States. There are no drugs available for it. Nobody is working on a drug for it. It was brought to us by the specialists who treat EOE because they're the same ones who treat benign strictures. And they said, we think your drug can solve this problem based on what we're seeing in EOE. So there's a whole expansion opportunity that's a very rapid and fairly cheap follow because we get to use all this work that we've done here, that really has the opportunity to potentially double that EOE market. So that kind of puts a bow around EOE, I think.
Yeah, let's move on to OA and talk about that a bit. And there's a
Perfect.
couple other indications. You could mention those real briefly, and then we'll get ready to wrap it up here in 15 minutes or so.
Perfect. Fantastic. So let me talk about osteoarthritis. So I'm not going to belabor what the disease is. I think we all know what it is. I'm going to sort of come up with something that I think a lot of people don't say, which is if you have osteoarthritis, there is not a single drug that you can safely take that is effective that you can take all the time. You should not be taking nonsteroidal anti-inflammatories like ibuprofen, Voltaren, Celebrex every day. The risks of cardiovascular complications, strokes, gastrointestinal complications are far too large to be taking it all the time. Corticosteroids, which are very effective in pain relief, they have a lot of systemic complications, such as cortisol suppression. If you're diabetic, they derange your blood sugar, make your insulin management very difficult. And 30% of these people with osteoarthritis are diabetics. It also prevents you giving steroid shots in multiple joints, yet 70% of these people have more than one joint that's affected. So in other words, the issue here is there are effective drugs, but they're not safe enough. And so what we did, as you can imagine now, having seen the EOE, is we took fluticasone, we have it released within the joint in such a way that it's providing us with long efficacy. So we're getting essentially 6 months of relief from a single injection, but it's the safety that really matters here. It's about the ability to dose this without worrying about diabetics, without worrying about whether you're giving it in more than one joint, and to be able to use it safely. So this data was published from our 300 patient first pivotal trial, was published in the Lancet in October. So the Lancet and the New England Journal are the two top journals that are really sort of out there in the world from the medical side of things. And they published it not because we lasted longer than everybody else, which we do. It was because of the safety. And that opens this market up. And, there's 18 million people with knee osteoarthritis, but there's another 18 million with osteoarthritis of other joints. And then there are other places that you can use this, and sort of physicians have expressed interest in trying this, such as frozen shoulder, plantar fasciitis. So we think of this as a medication going to orthopedic surgeons and rheumatologists and their ability to treat a variety of ailments. So again, a very large market. This is a pretty heavy commercial lift. There is only one phase 3 trial left to do. We've had our end of phase 2 meeting with the FDA. It's a simple rinse and repeat of the trial we have already done, so very little risk. We're very active in discussions with a variety of interested parties who are interested in taking this asset and commercializing it. So that's likely something that you will see through the course of 2025.
Hey,
After,
James.
yeah,
Sorry to break in.
no, not at all.
So based on what you just said about the drug or the therapy in
Yeah.
OA, I mean, just you foresee this being a forever drug for just about any patient at any age for the rest of their life? Or do you
Yeah.
know that, or is that difficult to say at this point in time?
So it's a little bit difficult to say, but if you think about the reasons that physicians stop giving these drugs, it is usually a combination of some local effects, but it's also the systemic effects. So if you take, if you get a steroid injection into two knees every 3 months with the current therapy, what will happen is your body's natural steroid will just disappear. And you couldn't do that as a diabetic. And so they don't do
No.
it. So if you've ever gone to have an injection from your doctor, what'll happen is you'll feel amazing for about 6 to 8 weeks. And then you'll go
Hmm.
back and say, "Oh, I felt great. Can I get another one?" The doctor will say, "Well, it's not safe for me to give you one now. Come back in another 6 months and we'll talk." Well, we want to solve that problem. Number one, by making it last longer. Number two, by when you are in pain, you can go back and you can get another one.
Got it. That sounds great. Yeah, it's the perfect solution. My wife has it in her wrist. So it works. You say it's knee in this trial, but it would work for other joints as well. You mentioned earlier, right? Like
Yeah, so
wrist, shoulder.
yeah, so when you look at the data that's out there, a steroid that works in one joint works in another. And
Sure.
so a lot of people, base of the thumb, wrist,
That's
ankle.
where hers is.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
base of the thumb is actually the third most common osteoarthritis. Um, and so it is, there are about 9 million people with base of the thumb osteoarthritis, and it's really debilitating.
Hmm.
And they don't like to inject it very much
Nope.
because of the side effects. And so, we think that there's the ability there. Back pain, facet joints, which are the little joints that run down the spinal cord or down sort of on the bony part outside the spinal cord, those get injected. Um, and so it creates this very large market opportunity. Again, it's been good for patients. For physicians, it fits their business model. It fits how they want to work. It allows them to continue to make their patients feel good. And for insurance companies, it works because when patients are in pain, they're usually getting out of shape, they're getting other complications, they're not able to work. And so all of these things basically all come together to create what we hope is a great product for patients and the system.
Perfect. That's great. That really answered my question. Thanks.
Yeah, of course. And lastly, what I'll say, and just sort of it's for 20 seconds here before I move on to sort of the financial piece here, is what you've seen here demonstrated is that the diffuse sphere can package a drug and can deliver it where you want it, so into the tissues that need the treatment and not the tissues that don't. If you think about cancer therapy and chemotherapy, chemotherapy is hitting every cell in the body, and it's why we see all the complications. It's why people get sick. It's why they get immunosuppressed. It's why they lose their hair, is because you're hitting healthy cells that do not have cancer, trying to get the ones that have cancer. Well, we know that we can package up several different chemotherapeutic agents, and the opportunity for us to target sort of specific tumors in cancer is very, very appealing. So that's sort of look for that in the relatively near term as continued expanded opportunity for growth here, and really also a big interest to sort of pharma partners. So just wrapping things up here, the share price on Nasdaq, as you can see here, it's a market cap of around 150 million. I want to point out the shares outstanding and fully diluted. So it's not a huge float. It's 44.5 million. A fully diluted shares is 59 million. The delta between that is a bit of an option pool, but the majority of it is warrants from a financing almost 5 years ago. Those warrants are deep in the money. They represent about 17 million in value. They're held by very friendly long-term shareholders. And they expire in the early part of 2026. So likely what'll happen is those will be exercised sort of over time. So it'll be quite stable for the market, and may provide a little bit more liquidity than there perhaps is today. As you'll see, in terms of insider ownership, look, we've all invested. I've invested in every round the company has had since day one. That is true of most of board and management. And so as a result, there's strong ownership because of hard capital put on the table by insiders. In terms of cash on hand, we reported September 30th, 8.7 million. We subsequent to that did a $41 million raise. We burned 5 to 6 million a quarter. So if you were doing a little bit of math and we're expecting our year end to look in the order of 33 to 34 million cash in the bank, you would be about right. And we will have those official numbers out fairly soon as we report our year end and fourth quarter. So we find ourselves in a very good cash position. That cash allows us to execute on everything that I talked about today. For EOE up to the beginning of the phase 3 trial. So all of that phase 2 data, the randomized trial, the end of phase 2 meeting is all covered with what we have in Treasury. And that takes us to Q3 of 2026. So it allows us, to always be conscious of Treasury, and to be able to manage it without ever feeling pressured. And so with that, maybe I'll just see if there's final questions. Yeah, if I can answer anything else.
That's great. So did I understand that correctly with the options that would bring another $17 million into the company or approximately something like that?
With the in-the-money warrants, correct.
Right. So that's really, if you take the 33 notional number you just mentioned, probably more like you have a 50 million, potentially $50 million cash runway, which would take you out even a little bit further. Great presentation, James. Really easy to understand and follow, which we really appreciate. We've had some of the other ones more difficult to follow. If you have a question for James, please ring in right now, and we can get that question answered for you. Again, the company trades on both Nasdaq and the TSX main board, and the ticker is EPRX. If you'd like to get additional information, the company's website is Eupraxia. That's EUPRAXIA Pharma, PHARMA.com. A lot of information on there with this PowerPoint presentation, information about the clinical trial platform and timelines, as well as a full set of financials and press releases. Really appreciate you coming on today and giving us the company's current operations, plans to bring additional diffusphere-based therapies through the clinic. And is there anything else you'd like to share with us before we wrap this up?
I think just to remind everybody just how active from a news flow perspective we're going to be, really over the next 90 days and 180 days. That the rest of 2025 is very dense in clinical data in the EOE program, sort of at a very important stage. So we're very much looking forward to sharing that with the market as that data comes along, and hope that the trend continues of what we've been seeing, and that there'll be a lot of positive reaction, which will be great for investors and great for patients. And just wanted to say thank you, everybody, for your attention. Great questions today, and really appreciate it.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much. And again, if you'd like to get a copy of, we have the Craig Hallam report. We've read, it's very good. If you'd be interested in getting a copy of that report, let me know via email. We can assist you in getting a digital copy of that report. Also, that has that one also is a $12, and that's $12 US price target, as I recall, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
It's a great, very comprehensive and informative report. And if you like today's content, be sure to hit if you're watching this on our YouTube channel, be sure to hit the subscribe now button at the bottom of the screen, and we'll make sure you get other presentations like this in the future. James, again, thanks so much for coming on. I want to thank everyone else for coming on today, and we'll look forward to having you on a future webinar podcast presentation produced by Torrey Hills Capital. Until then, be safe, be well. Thanks, James. We'll see you again in the near future.
Thank you, Clayton. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful day.
You too. Bye now.